Hello, everyone. I'm Stephen W. Long. This is The Writing Life, and I'm so pleased today to have Heather Sharfeddin as my guest again. We did this a couple of years ago. Heather has a new book out, and I think we've got some real fun topics to talk about for aspiring writers and just kind of see what's going on. So first, welcome, Heather.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about your book first.
Okay.
This is the 5th novel, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And a thumbnail?
Well, it's interesting because this book is about, well, there's 2 storylines. There's the living and the dead.
Okay.
So it's kind of goes into speculative fiction. It was a new area for me.
I was going to say.
Yeah, it's different. And I just was captivated by a particular cemetery. And I used to go there to think and contemplate. I mean, cemeteries are great for that because nobody bothers you. You can laugh, you can talk, you can cry, and people just leave you alone. And so this whole book sort of sprouted out of the idea that what if the people who are here can hear each other? But
here being in the cemetery.
Yeah, hear each other in the cemetery, but and they can actually, so it's pretty far out there. They can read each other's minds.
Oh, not at all.
So I started writing this story, and it just kind of took off. It's about a 16-year-old girl who is dead, and she's trapped in a cemetery with 5 other people. They've come in at different times in their lives.
This is ridiculous.
They've come in at different times in time. So there are people who've been there for 100 years. There are people who've been there for a few months. And they're from all different walks of life. And they're thrust into this environment together. It's a little bit like our town, actually, in some way. And then there's a second storyline about a young woman who is alive, but has been in a riding accident. And she has lost her memory. And she's trying to reconnect with her family. And she doesn't feel that she fits in. So it's sort of a parallel story. Towards the end, they weave together in a way that is compelling, which I won't give away the ending, because the ending is, it was hard to write the ending, and it's worth the read, I think. So.
I hadn't planned to go here, but I was going to tell the folks, when we first met, I was at a poetry reading where you read your work, and it was so moving. And now this is a hint to me that your work packs a punch.
Oh, thank you.
Let me just say it that way. So these, when you were talking about the dead, it reminded me of the movie Coco.
Oh, I don't.
Yeah, so that's all about. I'm going to say this wrong, but El Dia de Muerte.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the Day of the Dead.
Yeah, I haven't read it.
So, and that is another land where people are.
It's an interesting thing. I think when you write fiction, you tend to look for new things to write.
Sure.
And new topics, and sort of explore the boundaries of things. And at least for me, it was a really fun thing to write. I don't know that I'll stay in that genre, but it's my favorite book.
Okay,
really
so
and
that's. I have a guest in the studio, my friend George Glonka, and George is a writer, and we've been talking about his work is different. I mean, probably to some extent everybody's is different. How you approach it, which I want to get into you a little bit about maybe marketing and so on.
Okay.
But when you talk about that, this is your favorite book. Up to some point, I would think that you have both a master's and a PhD.
Mm-hmm.
So you've studied this. I don't think that's the same as writing.
It is not the same as writing.
Okay,
it absolutely is not the same as writing.
And that's kind of where I was going. So you wrote a book, and then you wrote another book, and so on. What I'm leading up to is, don't you think you get better? Like anything else, as the more you do it, the better you get.
Yes, you do get better. And in fact, one of the reasons that book is my favorite, my personal favorite, is because it's a technically difficult book.
Okay.
So I transitioned between first person omniscient and third person. And the first person omniscient is in present tense, and it's the dead people.
Okay.
And third person is in past tense, and it's the living people. So from a technical perspective and a study, it was really fascinating to write. And I do think you get better. It's interesting though, because my first book, Black Belly, is the one that my readers love the most. And I was just free-forming it. I didn't have a master's degree then. I just was writing a story from my heart.
Yeah. Let's finish up with that, and then I want to ask you about POV. So Black Belly won a couple of awards, I think.
It did, yeah. It won the San Francisco Book Award and the Eric Hoffer Award. I can't remember. It's been over 10 years.
No, you're right, because I looked it up.
And it won a PNBA Notable Fiction Award. So.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
But back to POV. I think that's so important, and I think a lot of readers aren't as aware of that. Certainly the writers are. Yes. And but you said first person omniscient.
Yeah.
To me, first person is one thing and omniscient is something else.
It is. That's why that book was technically difficult to write. And it's one of the reasons that people stumble with it, because they're like, your point of view is all over the place, but it isn't. It's just that it's kind of, it stretched the boundaries of point of view.
Give me an example. I'm trying to get my head around what that means.
Because they're dead, anything goes, right? So I'm in this world that I've created, and what I did was I created an environment where, because they're dead and they're in a cemetery, they can hear each other's thoughts.
Okay.
And so the protagonist is a 16-year-old girl. She's very belligerent, and she can hear what other people are thinking about her, and so that sparks her anger and creates this angst, and so she begins to act out towards them and create additional problems because she's young and she's impulsive. Yeah,
that's a great character, because if there was nothing wrong, a 16-year-old may have an attitude.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, good. But this is a departure because, just if you can broadly describe your other books, aren't they?
Sure.
They're Western themed.
Well, they're set in the Pacific Northwest, in the inland Northwest. They're Western themed in the sense that they tend to be rural.
Okay.
But not Western in the sense of genre Western, and I've had a real problem with, finding my book next to Louis L'Amour. And it just isn't. Not anything wrong with Louis L'Amour, but that's not what it is.
Yeah.
And so but they're pretty traditional first person or third person fiction, and not wild.
One protagonist typically, or
one protagonist, and typically more than one point of view, though.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So shifting third person.
Yeah.
Okay. I keep leading up to something here, and you touched on it again with your book being next to Louis L'Amour, which to me, well, the first thing is, isn't this ridiculous? They just got to leave me alone. I always thought that would be so embarrassing, but it wouldn't happen to me because I always shut it off. So the first thing you have to do is, so you write the book, and you've done your best and so on, and now you're looking for representation.
Right.
I've had a real tough time with that. I think a lot of people do. I think there's a lot of different reasons for that. You've done real well, but
I wouldn't say real well.
Okay, so you got an agent.
Yeah.
They sold your book, and now it's the marketing. So and this is kind of what I want to talk about, is the marketing of this. Now, to some, maybe a small degree, the marketing of the book that you're talking about, or maybe books, was less than satisfying. But you don't have a lot of input.
You don't have any input.
Okay.
In fact, I was with a pretty big publishing house for 3 books, and I remember getting a call from the publicist that was assigned, and she was the 3rd person that was assigned by the time the book was actually in print. And I was I had sent her my itinerary. I was going to go out on the road and I was going to do all these events and sort of circle the Pacific Northwest. And I was literally out on the road doing that, and she called and said, can you go on cable radio today? Like, I'm doing what I'm, you know. And she completely wasn't tracking with what was going on.
Right.
So, and I think that's fairly typical. I'm finding that not just for myself, but for a lot of really great authors I know who are traditionally published, that in the last 5 to 8 years, marketing is just completely dried up. There
Right.
just isn't any marketing. If you're going to get any book marketing, you're going to be marketing it yourself.
Right. For my first book, the emphasis for me was marketing.
Yeah.
And I got the book, and I'm reasonably proud of that. But the money, because that's what it takes,
Yeah.
went to a publicist who did a terrible job,
Yeah.
in my opinion.
Yeah.
And in the end, he said, well, sales really are driven by the acceptance of the public. And I completely agree, with the caveat that the public has to know
They
about
have
it.
to know about
and
your
that
work.
was his job.
Yeah, exactly.
And I said that you're like the guy who drives by the lake and doesn't get out of the car and says, well, the fish aren't biting today, and keeps driving. So
Exactly.
I was somewhat disappointed.
Yeah, I think that the whole publishing world has completely changed. It's just a different.
There's no doubt about
It's
it.
just different. And I'm the worst self-promoter. I didn't even bring my book with me today. I'm just not. To be honest with you, it offends me a little bit when I encounter someone and the first thing they want to tell me about is their book.
Sure.
And I encounter that all too often, and it's not just me. I think everybody does. You know, I was making a joke with a friend that I could walk into any bar in McMinnville and find 4 authors.
Oh, yeah.
And that afternoon, I went down to the Bitter Monk, and right there were 4 authors.
Uh-huh.
So, you know, I mean,
We're all over the place.
We are. We are. And I think writing is a good thing. And I think being a writer is a great thing. But there's got to be some way for us to talk about our writing without it being in everybody's face.
A promotion.
And promoting, trying to sell books.
Yeah.
And I haven't figured out what that balance is.
Well, I think ideally it would be have somebody else do it, and I'm not kidding. I
Like
wish
the
that
old
there
days.
was still that division,
Yeah.
that the writer stays home and writes,
Mm-hmm.
and then the publisher finds a way to promote this thing.
Well, and if you think about it, people who write seriously are not the best people to go out and promote their work. They're introverts. They tend to be
Sure.
not comfortable in that arena. And if you ask someone, you know, what's your book about? It's like deer in the headlights. It's like it's so deep to you because you've spent so much time working on it, and there's so much nuance there that trying to encapsulate it into, you know, a soundbite is almost impossible.
I'm trying to remember the fellow's name. He wrote Mystic River. You're going to help me out? Well, we'll get it. But this wasn't about Mystic River. It was another book. And he got, I think he got the galleys back. And they wanted him to, they were going to publish the book as, you know, as it had eventually been edited in that form. But they wanted to do an audiobook and wanted it shorter. And sent back to him their suggestions. Well, he had the courier wait there while he opened it up, signed that this is fine. Of course, he didn't look at it, and sent it back. And then his publisher called him at one point and said, gee, you know, you didn't make any suggestions at all. And he said, if I could do it in 300 pages, I would have done it in 300 pages.
Yeah, exactly.
The story as I conceived it is 400 pages.
Right.
And you're going to do what you're going to do, so
Yeah.
have at it.
Yeah. I admire people like that. One of my favorite authors is Cormac McCarthy.
Oh boy, yeah.
Not just for his writing. I mean, his writing is out of this world. But he and his wife couldn't even afford to buy toothpaste. And he would not go out and promote his work.
Ah.
In fact, he was offered a speaking gig at some library, and he turned it down, and his wife was like, please.
I'd really like to eat tonight.
Yeah. And he's like, no, I write. So,
isn't that something?
And there's a certain amount of admiration I have for a person like that.
Sure.
It's like they're very, very serious about their craft, and the rest be damned.
I've heard that in the opening sentences and paragraph of a book, the author is presenting a contract to the reader. And what the author says is, I guarantee you that I'm going to take you on this journey. We're going to create this dream, and I'm not going to do anything to mess it up. Well, I'm not going to mess up the dream for you. Trust me that I'm competent to do that. And the reader can get that in the first page or so.
Yeah.
And with Cormac McCarthy, more than anybody else, that's what I felt. Because he's not traditional, or
no.
I mean punctuation, or I mean word choice or anything. And it's like the train's pulling out, and if you want to get on board, then that's terrific. But I'm going.
Yeah.
So
he is really that kind of writer.
Yeah, I love that. And Annie Proulx is another.
Oh yeah, she's good. Her depiction of Wyoming and Oklahoma, that whole stretch is really amazing. I mean, she's from New Brunswick, and she lived in that area for 10 years and wrote about it. And she wrote about it like a native.
Well, I thought she lived in both. So
she did live there.
The shipping news, right?
Shipping News was set in New Brunswick.
In the east, and then Wham Sutter Wolf
Yeah.
was in Wyoming.
What was it, violin crimes? That was kind of all over the place.
Huh.
But
was it violent? There is accordion crimes.
Accordion crimes, that's what it was.
Yeah. One of those instruments. Yeah.
Much prefer a violin over an accordion.
She wrote, it was a short story called The Sky Above, the Mud Below.
Oh.
And it's fabulous, for one thing. And as I was reading that, I thought, if you didn't know a woman wrote this,
you wouldn't know.
You wouldn't know. It's very earthy, maybe, but she just knocks me out. She's so good.
Her short stories, Bad Dirt.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorite volumes. Yeah, I really.
That may be collected. This story may be.
It might be in there. Yeah.
Yeah.
She has some funny stuff that really pushes the boundaries and goes into speculative fiction. She had one where there was some sort of metal in a belt buckle, and every time the belt buckle was passed to somebody, something weird would happen, like they'd fall in love with someone that they shouldn't be in love with. And one guy had a plate in his head, and he was so in love with the belt buckle that he actually went diving for it. I mean, it was just a weird story, and it was interesting. It was like, that would never happen, but it was a good story.
She wrote one that was, and I shouldn't even start this because I can't remember, but it was very violent. And it was that sort of, well, I've started now, I might as well finish. Kind of a thing.
Yeah.
But she can do it.
Her work can be, it can leave you sort of devastated. When I read Brokeback Mountain, I had heard about it, and it took me a while to get around to reading it. And when I read it, probably 2 weeks, it just kept coming back to me over and over again.
Sure.
Really
I read it, and it didn't have that effect on me, but I wasn't offended or, I think it's, boy, I think everything's fair game.
Yeah.
And so I admired her for that.
Yeah, she's one of my favorites.
Yeah. So you're, am I right, an adjunct professor?
I am, yeah.
At
I'm
Linfield?
teaching at Linfield, and I'm a freelance writer, so I spend quite a bit of my time ghostwriting books for lawyers.
Really?
Yeah.
Not law, something else?
Well, how to pick a jury, how to
really
do opening statements. Yeah.
Now, do they give you the meat of it and you organize it, or do you note it?
Mostly, yeah, mostly. I have one client who I have several videos of him doing what he does.
Okay.
So I'm converting that into a book. And then I have another client who he specializes in trucking law, so there's a lot of material that he gives me. It's really interesting, actually.
I would think it'd be terrific.
Yeah.
So now your summer class that's coming up is, or at least it in part deals with women.
Oh, women writers.
Women
through the
writers,
ages.
okay.
Yeah, so we go from Afra Byrne in 14, all the way through to Joyce Carol Oates and Louise Erdrich. So yeah, we're covering the gamut.
Yeah. A friend of mine is Elizabeth George, who's quite successful writer, and she calls Joyce Carol Oates La Machine. She really cranks them out,
yeah.
and that's a compliment.
But she cranks out such amazing stuff.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, I mean it's really stunning. So,
she wrote a short story that the guy was trying to create zombies, and he would use a knitting needle. Why are we talking about this?
Because it's interesting.
Because it is interesting. He would use a knitting needle up the person's nose and scramble their brain because he didn't want to kill them. He just wanted to make them a zombie.
A lobotomy.
and so while I'm reading this, I'm thinking about Miss Oates, if what goes on in her head.
Yeah, she's a fascinating writer.
Yeah, but again, prolific.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing. I wanted to ask you, when did you get the bug and when did you know it? What is it? Was it a book that you read? Do you think you were born with this?
Well, it's interesting because I was born with really large pupils.
Okay.
As you get older, they shrink.
Okay.
That's just a normal physiological thing. And as a younger person, reading was a chore. I hated reading.
Oh, gosh.
But I loved storytelling. And I lived in a really remote part of Idaho, and we didn't have television because it was so remote. And so people would get together in the evenings with their neighbors.
Oh, I love that.
Typically, miles away, but we would congregate, and they would tell stories, and they were outrageous stories. You knew when somebody was telling a story that, 60% of it was just made up.
Right.
But it was embellished in a way that was really fascinating. And so I grew up in this environment of storytellers. And in my 20s, maybe, I read Claire Davis's Winter Range. And I don't know if you've ever read it.
No.
She's an Idaho author. And I thought, this is so much. It's so consistent with the world that I grew up in, and she captured it so well that
Right.
was the moment where I thought, I think I could do this.
Yeah.
And so I started writing. I had written poetry and stuff, I'd
Sure.
dabbled, but I hadn't been serious until that moment.
Yeah. That was within a year or two probably when I tried to write, and I did some poetry that really, it wasn't great, but it wasn't embarrassing.
It's never great in the beginning.
Yeah, and but when I tried to do a longer work, I just ran out of steam, and it really took me a long time to understand and accept, and then learn about a process.
Yeah.
That you're building something,
Yeah.
and it's just like building anything, and there's steps that you do.
It's very true. I have a lot of 90-page novels. And, they're obviously not novels. They're just like the start.
Right.
You start out writing and just go gangbusters, and I get to page 90. And
Which I think is about typical. I think that's when
that's the make or break point. It's
Right.
like, am I going to be able to carry this story through or not?
Yeah.
And I have a lot of them that I just abandoned.
Then I would think that you are probably not an outliner.
No,
Yeah, see?
no. That would kill me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you outline?
I don't. And so having said that, I feel like my work is character driven, and so I really try to spend a lot of time on a character analysis, because that's where everything comes from.
I have this ridiculous exercise that I do where I interview a character. Usually when I hit a stopping point like that at 90 pages or whatever it is, it's because I don't have enough depth for the character.
Right.
And so I need to understand them better. I need to understand their motives. And I hate doing this, but I always get benefit from it. is I'll sit down and I'll interview my character. And
Yeah.
after the third or fourth question, and I, dispel with the ridiculousness of it, they really start talking to you, and
Sure.
they really start answering your questions. And before you know it, you have a real deep understanding of this character that you've created, and then you can carry that forward.
Yeah. I was taught that of all of the questions, physical attributes and philosophy and so on, when you get down to the end, you need the character's pathological maneuver. And that is, what does this person, when the pressure's on, where do they go?
Yeah.
Do they lie? Do they fight? Do they run? What is their pathological
That's
maneuver?
really interesting. I've never really thought about it that way, but I think you're right.
Yeah, and because what you want to do as the author, you want them under pressure.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is a cliche, but get your character up a tree and then throw rocks at him. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so.
That's very true.
Yeah.
My first novel, I think that's why people love it so much. It's about the main character is absolutely unwilling to compromise. And he's got a lot of integrity, and people can believe terrible things about him, but he will not compromise.
You know where you're at.
And it gets, and that was part of it, is that he had the truth, and he could have just told people, but he will not compromise. He just won't do it.
I remember hearing a story where they were about to hang a fellow, and somebody said, don't you have an alibi, or don't you have an excuse, or why don't you tell us something?
Yeah.
And he said, what can I tell you in truth that I couldn't tell you as a lie? So
that's really
that's
profound.
Sure.
Yeah.
In fact, here we go. But Tom Horn, do you remember that movie with Steve McQueen? Sort of in the end, he's been set up, and comes, and he doesn't try to get out of it,
Yeah.
And it's that that same thing.
Like,
Why, if you don't believe, you know who I am. If you, what can I say that's going to change?
Right.
That'll bring you back.
Right.
So.
That's exactly how this character is, and I think that's why people like him.
Yeah.
Oh,
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
When we see characters on TV or in the movies, I think it is the uncompromising nature. Maybe that's what makes a hero, because we wouldn't do that. We would protect ourselves.
Right.
We wouldn't go on the adventure because we'd have to give up our job.
Right.
We wouldn't stand up to...
Who's going to feed my cat?
Exactly. And but we admire that.
Yeah,
and
we
so
do.
that's what I think a lot of times makes a hero, is that they...
I think so.
The dedication to that web principle or something.
I think you're right. Yeah, it's fascinating.
And guess what else? We're about out of time.
Wow, that was
that was bad. Would you come back again?
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
All right. Thanks, Heather. Folks, that's it. This was fun. We'll see you next time on The Writing Life. I'm Stephen W. Long. Write to me at stephenwlong.com, and we'll just see you next time. Thanks. That's too fast.
What do you think? We done?
I don't know. You guys want to do one just with yourself without me doing the
As long as they think we're
podcast?
done, if they got enough, they got enough.
They got enough? Probably. Okay, sounds good.
Let's go lunch. I'm
Oh.
hungry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could use a bite too.